Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Have you ever found yourself gazing up at the night sky, feeling a deep connection to the stars and planets above? It turns out there is a name for that special feeling, Noctcaelador. But what does this love for the night sky really tell us about our minds? This new study dives deep into that very question. We're talking about something called Noctcaelador. Essentially, it is a fancy word for that deep emotional attachment some people feel to the night sky. Scientists have been looking into this for a while, and they found some interesting links. Some studies suggest it is tied to healthy thinking, while others hint at possible connections to things that might seem a little unusual. This led researchers to ask, could a strong attachment to the night sky be related to psychological dysfunction? The problem is, past research has been a bit of a mixed bag. It is like getting conflicting weather reports. You are not sure if you should grab an umbrella or sunscreen. Some findings suggested Noctcaelador was linked to positive psychological traits like being open to new experiences. But then, other research found it might be associated with things like having unusual perceptual experiences or even a tendency towards hallucinatory activity. So, the big question remained unanswered. Is this love for the stars a sign of a healthy mind, or could it point to something else? That is where this new study comes in. The researchers wanted to get a clearer picture. They decided to directly investigate the link between how much people love the night sky and signs of psychological dysfunction. They looked at how people's feelings about the night sky related to their scores on a well-known psychological test and also their cognitive abilities. So how did they do it? They gathered a group of 44 undergraduate students. It is important to note this was a relatively small group, and most of them were young adults from a university. They all filled out questionnaires. These questionnaires asked about their attachment to the night sky, their general psychological well-being, and their cognitive abilities. For measuring their attachment to the night sky, they used something called the Noctcaelador Inventory. It is a 10-question survey where people rate how much they agree or disagree with statements about their feelings towards the night sky. The higher the score, the more attached they are. To check for psychological dysfunction, they used a well-known and extensive test called the MMPI -2 -370. Think of this as a detailed questionnaire that asks a lot of true or false questions to get a comprehensive picture of different personality traits and potential psychological issues. It has scales that look at things like depression, anxiety, and even hypomania. And to measure cognitive ability, they used a quick test called the Baddeley Reasoning Test. This is a time test designed to see how well people can solve logical puzzles and think abstractly. It is like a mini brain workout. After collecting all the data, they crunched the numbers. They looked for any differences between men and women and then focused on the main question: how does Noctcaelador relate to these other measures? They used statistical tools to see if the connections they found were strong enough to be meaningful, not just random chance. The main way they looked for these relationships was through something called correlation. Imagine you are looking at two things, like ice cream sales and hot weather. A correlation tells you if those two things tend to go up or down together. A strong positive correlation means as one goes up, the other tends to go up. A strong negative correlation means as one goes up, the other tends to go down. So, what did they find? Well, they found that people who scored higher on Noctcaelador tended to score lower on defensiveness, which is measured by the K-scale on the MMPI -2. This means they were less likely to try and make themselves look better on the test. Also, higher Noctcaelador was linked to lower scores on the depression scale. That is good news. It suggests that a love for the night sky might be associated with feeling less down. But here is where things get really interesting. They found a large and significant positive relationship between Noctcaelador and hypomania. Hypomania on the MMPI -2 is related to things like high energy, enthusiasm, wide interests, and sometimes even unusual sensory experiences. It is like being full of creative or energetic ideas. And it wasn't just a little connection. When they looked specifically at people who scored high on Noctcaelador, they found that almost 29% of them also scored above the clinical threshold for hypomania. This is a substantial number, suggesting a strong link for some individuals. This finding directly supported one of their main hypotheses, that higher scores on Noctcaelador would be related to higher scores on hypomania. And as we mentioned, their hypothesis that higher Noctcaelador would be related to lower lower scores on depression was also supported. However, their hypotheses about Noctcaelador being related to masculinity, femininity scores, and schizophrenia scores were not supported. The study didn't find a significant connection there. The lack of defensiveness is particularly intriguing. It suggests that people who love the night sky might be more open and less inclined to put up a facade. This could tie into theories that suggest a more permeable, open inner world allows for a deeper connection to things like the vastness of the night sky. The finding about masculinity, femininity being unrelated was a bit of a surprise, especially since previous research had hinted at a link. The authors suggest this might be due to the specific way the MMPI-2 measures this, or perhaps differences in the types of students they studied compared to earlier research. The lack of a strong link to schizophrenia was also a point of discussion. While some earlier studies hinted at connections with unusual perceptual experiences, the specific scales of the MMPI-2 schizophrenia measure include aspects like disorganization and detachment from reality, which might not align perfectly with the characteristics of Noctcaelador. It is possible that the unusual perceptions seen in some Noctcaelador research might be better explained by hypomanic processes. This lack of defensiveness is a really interesting point. It suggests that people who are really drawn to the night sky might be more genuine and open in how they present themselves. It's like they're not trying too hard to impress or hide. Interestingly, Noctcaelador wasn't found to be related to cognitive ability in this study. This suggests that while people might have a deep connection to the night sky, it doesn't necessarily mean they have higher or lower abstract reasoning skills. It is more about a different kind of appreciation. So, putting it all together, the study found that for the most part, a love for the night sky isn't strongly linked to general psychological dysfunction. In fact, it seemed to be negatively related to depression and defensiveness. The big exception, however, was hypomania. It is important to remember that most of the hypomania scores in this study were not at the clinical level. However, the underlying processes associated with hypomania, like high energy, broad interests, creativity, and even occasional unusual sensory experiences, seem to overlap quite a bit with what we know about Noctcaelador. And that statistic about nearly a third of high Noctcaelador scorers being above the clinical cutoff for hypomania is a significant takeaway. It suggests that for some people, this fascination with the night sky might be a sign they're more prone to the energetic and sometimes unconventional traits associated with hypomania. Now, every study has its limits, and it is important to be critical. This study had a small sample size, mostly made up of young university students. So, we can't say for sure that these findings apply to everyone everywhere. Also, it was a cross-sectional study, meaning it looked at a snapshot in time. This means we can't definitively say that loving the night sky causes hypomania or vice versa. It is a correlation, and the relationship could go both ways or be influenced by something else entirely. The researchers suggest that future studies should look at larger and more diverse groups of people. They also think it would be beneficial to use different kinds of methods, maybe even interviews, to get a richer understanding, and exploring specific hypomanic processes in more detail, perhaps even using physiological measures, could shed more light on this connection. One particularly interesting suggestion is to look at how openness to experience plays a role. This is a personality trait related to curiosity and imagination. It might be that openness is the driving force behind both a love for the night sky and some of the traits seen in hypomania, acting as a bridge between them. So to wrap it all up, this study provides a more nuanced view. It seems that for most people, a deep connection to the night sky isn't a sign of psychological dysfunction. In fact, it might be linked to being more open and less depressed. However, the strong link to hypomania is a key finding. It suggests that for some individuals, the fascination with the cosmos might be intertwined with traits like high energy, creativity, and a tendency for unusual experiences. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something worth paying attention to. Ultimately, the authors emphasize that these traits, even those associated with hypomania, are only considered a dysfunction if they cause distress or problems in a person's life. Otherwise, they're just interesting parts of someone's personality. But for those where these traits do become problematic, the link to hypomania might mean a higher risk for mood disorders. This is an area that definitely needs more research. What do you think about these findings? Do you feel a special connection to the night sky? Let us know in the comments below if you found this breakdown helpful. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more insights into the fascinating world of psychology. We'll see you in the next one.